So bottom line, for muscle performance, whey is better than egg. Then plants, I would go with soy. Oat milk spikes blood sugar more than if you just drink a lemonade or eat a tablespoon of sugar. So I recommend lifting or cardio for best metabolic health. We definitely have a harder time building muscle as we get older, and really Tylenol is one of the worst things you could do before surgery. What is at the root cause of a tremor?
Welcome to our Q&A highlights. Q&A sessions are recorded every month, and our enhanced members get an exclusive opportunity to ask questions from one of cellular medicine's brightest minds, Dr. Elizabeth Yurth. Get a chance to ask your questions by becoming our enhanced member at bli.academy/memberships. You also get access to our content library full of tips, articles, videos, lectures, previous live Q&A sessions, and more.
Clementine asks, what should you look out for when choosing a whey protein powder? Okay, this is a great question. Okay, so I get a lot of questions on what is the best type of protein powder, because is it whey, is it pea, is it hemp? So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about that, because we just had this discussion in my with my CCCs a little while ago. So here's why whey is the gold standard, and I understand we'll talk about. I know some of you can't do whey either because you're vegetarians or because whey bothers your gut. So we'll talk about other options, but the reason whey is the gold standard, and if you can do whey, why you should be doing whey protein isolates, is it's really rich in leucine. We just talked about that. Leucine is the key amino acid for muscle protein synthesis. So if you're doing a collagen like a beef broth protein, right, it doesn't contain leucine. So basically you need the leucine-rich, which is in a full protein conglomerate, and not just when you isolate out the collagen component of it, right? So as much as those are great, they're great sources of protein, right? They don't contain the full spectrum of amino acids, particularly leucine. So you've got to look for leucine-rich, okay? The other good thing about whey protein is it contains immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, cysteine. Those all support immune function and glutathione production. So it's why I think whey protein isolates are the gold standard. They've been extensively studied for muscle growth, recovery, metabolic health. The second best to whey, probably if you can't do whey, is eggs. So eggs have an excellent amino acid profile. They're highly digestible. There's no lactose in it. They mix well into things. Cons are, again, low in leucine compared to whey, but better than any of the plant-based proteins. So an egg-based protein, if you can't tolerate dairy, an egg-based protein is probably your next best bet. They are significantly more expensive. So bottom line, for muscle performance, whey is better than egg. Then plants, I would go with soy, and then beef collagen. Those would be my choices if you're looking at this for kind of muscle building. Jamie asks if oat milk is good for you. Short answer, Jamie, no. The very worst milk you can drink. Why is oat milk so bad for you? Oat is very high in starch. So oat milk, processing those starches, they're broken down into basically maltose and glucose, right? So it basically breaks down into sugar in your body. So very big spike in sugar. In fact, oat milk spikes blood sugar. If you guys ever want to see CGM, drink some oat milk. It'll spike blood sugar more than if you just drink a lemonade, okay? Or eat a tablespoon of sugar. So it's going to drive up insulin. It's going to drive insulin resistance. It's going to destabilize energy and appetite. At least oats have fiber in them, so it blunts that effect a little bit. But when you've taken all the fiber out of it by drinking oat milk, you've just gotten rid of anything that would have been helpful. The other problem is that oats are really toxic. They have more glyphosates, at least here in the US, not so much in Europe, but more glyphosates than almost any product out there, all right? So it persists through processing and ends up in these oat-based products. So, and the other thing is most commercial oat milks also use canola or sunflower oil. If you look at them, they have sunflower oil or canola oil in them. So that's not great. And then a lot of them have residues. Heavy metal oats seem great at picking up things like arsenic and cadmium. So really, just stay away from oat milk. It was marketed as plant-based and healthy. It is not. It's one of the more unhealthy things that you can do. Do I recommend lifting or cardio for best metabolic health? So for muscle preservation and growth, remember that resistance training depletes glycogen and it signals mTOR, right? So that's what we want for maintaining muscle mass. Your major driver of metabolic health is muscle mass. So if you do cardio after lifting, not before, then you're going to enhance fat oxidation since glycogen's already low. If you do cardio first, you're not going to get the muscle benefits as much. You've actually set your muscles and nervous system into a different state, into more of an AMPK state, not mTOR state, and you're going to actually inhibit muscle building. So if you're concerned about muscle, which is probably the basis of metabolic health, then do your cardio after you're lifting. Now, if your main goal is simply endurance, you want to run 100 miles, right? Then doing your cardio first is going to prioritize your mitochondrial adaptations for that, for stamina. Okay, so if your priority is not muscle building, again, that's not your metabolic health. Your metabolic health comes from muscle. Then you could do your cardio first. So if you're just lifting weights to kind of keep a little bit of muscle on, but your big focus is a long endurance event, then doing cardio first is okay. All right, but for most of us, lift first and then do cardio. All right. I think that's probably the best for longevity, for metabolic health, is to kind of do that approach. What would your protocol for building muscle for women in their 70s be? So we definitely have a harder time building muscle as we get older. And some of that is hormonal, not all, but some. First and foremost, make sure there's adequate estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. All three of those hormones are critically important for muscle building, not just testosterone. And they have to be at high enough levels to really accomplish that goal. And then you have to remember that our protein intake needs to increase as we age. We just need more protein to build muscle than when I was 20. So you definitely have to get up into that, at least 1 gram a day, and maybe up to like 1.2 or 1.5 grams per pound of lean body weight. And you also have to prioritize leucine-rich protein. Leucine is key. And that's one of the problems with people who are following like a vegetarian more diet, is that it's very hard to get leucine. So leucine is found in whey protein, not in the plant-based proteins. You don't have very much leucine in the plant-based proteins. So that's why whey protein isolates are really better. Fish, eggs, lean meats all have leucine-rich foods, and they're going to stimulate mTOR. Eating it throughout the day instead of just in one big huge meal seems to be more effective as we get older too, probably just because our absorption gets a little less. And then adding a collagen with vitamin C, like Fortigel collagen with vitamin C, also that's going to support tendons and joints. But the body's smart, and it knows if it has better tendon and joint support, it can put on more muscle. So there's something to our bone size, tendon structure that tells our body to incorporate more or less muscle. Make sure you're getting adequate calories. Make sure you're getting adequate fiber. Creatine, absolutely essential. And maybe going up to actually 10 grams a day of creatine if you're doing creatine monohydrate. If that bothers your gut, go to a creatine HCl. It's easier on the gut. But you need creatine. It's especially important for us as we get older for both muscle and cognition. You've got to do resistance training. So it has to be weight training. The other thing is if you're having trouble with that, for instance, you have an injury, then using blood flow restriction bands like Katsu bands can also help really put on muscle with less weight or load to the joints. Don't forget balance and mobility training too. You've got to make sure you're flexible. That's really critical just to not get injured as you're doing all these other things. I also will say if your IGF is very low, so measure your insulin-like growth factor. If IGF is very low, you're going to have a hard time putting on muscle. CJC, ipamorelin, or tesamorelin, or MK677, all growth hormone secretagogues that can be helpful for building muscle. So you have to not just look at hormones, testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen, but also growth hormone is a hormone that's critical for muscle building as well. And then the other trick I use is fortitropin. So fortitropin is a myostatin inhibitor. Remember when I exercise, my body has a set point. It only wants so much muscle. It's kind of my genetic basis. So if I'm like me, leaner, skinnier person, then it's harder to put on muscle than some of the shorter, bulkier people. I can trick my body by blocking myostatin, by blocking the thing that is inhibiting me from forming as much muscle. So after I exercise, because after you exercise, myostatin will go up to stop you from building so much muscle. So if you block it at that point, so you can do fortitropin, which is found in a product called Myos MD. It comes from fertilized egg yolks. So fertilized egg yolk, this Myos MD product, do a scoop of that after you exercise. You're going to turn off myostatin. You'll be able to form more muscle. So those are little tricks that are kind of helpful. And then, sleep, recovery, obviously critical too. As if I were to have one supplement that everybody took, it would be exogenous ketones. Because I'm going to keep mitochondria healthier. I'm going to keep ATP up. The number of diseases I've just prevented by better mitochondria or better ATP. We just talked about neurodegenerative diseases, brain, peripheral nerves, tremors. Those are all mitochondrial diseases. Cancer is a mitochondrial disease. Chronic fatigue, muscle loss, mitochondrial diseases. So if I can give ATP, which is a great source, exogenous ketones, I'm going to prevent a lot of that destruction that happens with time. So I think everybody should be doing exogenous ketones. Mary asks, she asked about the new Alzheimer's blood test. It's called precede 82, and it measures amyloid beta and p-tau and gives you what's called an amyloid probability score. And she asked if it's legit or not. So let me answer that in a couple of ways. Number one, this is a test that's measuring amyloid plaque and phospho-tau 217. And they combine those into what they call a probability score to indicate whether the amyloid plaques are likely present in the brain. It's kind of a proprietary algorithm. In clinical studies, in symptomatic people, 55 plus with dementia, it showed about an 80 to 90% accuracy compared to doing PET scans or CSF testing, which has been our sort of gold standards for diagnosing Alzheimer's. So it does appear very good. Some of the tests even showing greater than 90% accuracy. So clinical confidence using this test has raised really when we give a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, from about 50 to 60% to about 90%. So I think from a technical and performance level, this test is robust, accurate, and probably clinically useful. But my bias is that amyloid plaques are likely not the cause of Alzheimer's. There's a lot of growing skepticism about this, and the plaques are actually not causal, but maybe actually appearing to help protect the brain. We are increasingly learning that migraines are probably not just vascular, and they may actually be, like every disease, and you guys will hear me talk about this over and over again, a mitochondrial disease. So are we actually looking at mitochondrial dysfunction in people who have migraines? The reason that's so important is because that mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain, maybe now migraines, what is mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain later? It's cognitive loss, it's dementia. So we really have to look at people with migraines because that is a predictor of mitochondrial dysfunction that's going to be leading to dementia. And indeed, we see that. You see white matter changes on the brain, and we see that progress, and we see that then lead to cognitive decline. I did want to give you guys a little story because, this was general anesthesia, which I hate, but I'm doing a lot now to try and detox, taking a lot of NAC, things like that to try and detox. But it's funny, they come to you and they hand you 2 little pills before your surgery, and she's like, okay, here, take these. I'm like, well, what are they? She's like, just Tylenol. I'm like, okay, no, I don't want Tylenol. It's the last thing I want. And she's like, it's just Tylenol. Guys, remember, they always will give you Tylenol before surgeries. The worst thing you can do, because that blocks glutathione. Glutathione is your main way to detox this general anesthesia. So I said no to Tylenol, and really Tylenol is one of the worst things you could do before surgery, even though it may help with pain afterwards. So just a heads up, because I think that's something we just commonly do in surgery, and it's just probably got a lot more problems than upsides.